Okay, today's lesson's on graphing lines. So we're going to talk about slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. If you remember learning that in earlier in Algebra 1 and back in 8th grade. So when we look at this equation, there's two different variables. The x and y are coordinates on the plane. So those switch. X and y change depending on where on the line you are. But the m and the b are the constants. B is considered a constant, and B stands for the y-intercept. So that's why we call this form slope-intercept form, because it gives you the slope and the y-intercept. So the B is a y-intercept, and I always think B is for begin. Okay, so B is for begin. So when you graph, you begin at the B. And then the M is the slope. Okay, and that M stands for move, because after you begin at the B, it tells you how much to move. And we think of slope as rise over run. So it's how far you move up or down, and then how far you move side to side. So we're going to use that to do the problems moving forward. So looking at the first part, we do calculate the slopes and y-intercepts, write the equation of a line in slope-intercept form from the given graph. So that is our goal. So we look at this equation, and the first thing we need to know is a slope. So you have two ways to find the slope. I find the easiest thing if you have a graph is to just count it out. So you go from one point to the other, how you rise, so how far up or down do you go? So in this case, I went up 4, and then run, how far side to side? I went over +3. So the slope would be 4 over 3. The other way to do slope is by the coordinates. So if you look at the coordinates, we always start with the y because that's the up and down. So we say if we went from -5 to -1, we moved 4 in the positive direction. If we moved from 0 to 3, we moved up 3. So same idea, the slope is 4 over 3. The y-intercept is the point on the y-axis in which your line crosses. So in this case, the y-intercept is at -5. The coordinate will always be 0 for x, and then the coordinate of the y. And so then when we write our equation, y equals, again, it's mx plus b. M is the slope, and then an x. And then because our b is negative, we're going to put -5. And now we wrote the equation of that line. So let's look at the second one. So again, we find our slope. You can start at either point and count to the other one. I'm going to start at this point here and move to there. So I'm going to go down 2 and over 1, 2, 3, 4. I went to the right, so it's positive. So I have a -2 over 4. I should reduce my slope if possible, so I'm going to say it's -1 over 2. And then the y-intercept, again, that's the point on the y-axis and where the line crosses, and it crosses at +1. And then the equation, y equals the slope, so mx, and then plus the y-intercept, which is 1. So what about if we're not given a graph and we're just told the slope and the y-intercept, and we don't have a graph? Same idea. We know the slope and we know the y-intercept. So we're going to start with y equals, again, we put the slope, that's m, and then the y-intercept, so x plus b, which is 7. You're going to do this one afterwards on your own. Actually, this one I just realized is a typo. It says the slope is blank. So this should say the slope is 7. It will be on your paper correct. Okay, mine doesn't have it, but yours should say 7. Okay, so do that one on your own. So now on the next page, now we're given the equation and we are going to graph it. So y equals mx plus b. So we're identifying our m and our b. So always begin at the b, and remember that is the y-intercept. So on the y, we're going to put a nice big point at 1. And then we do move the slope. So we're going to move the slope, which is 2. We always want a fraction because it's rise over run. So if we only have a whole number, we're going to put it over 1 because 2 over 1 is the same thing as 2. So we're going to rise 2 and run 1, rise 2, run 1. We can also make this negative 2 over negative 1. And we can go down 2 and negative 1, down 2 and negative 1. And then we're going to connect our points across the whole graph. Okay, the slope is constant. It changes at the same rate the whole time. So once you figure out the pattern, you can just continue it. Okay, so you're going to graph this one on your own, and then you're going to do the rest of the problems on this paper. So on these ones, you're writing the equation like we did earlier, and then all 4 of these. Okay, so this goes with this here, and this one goes with that there. Same thing here. That equation goes with that one. So find the slope. Okay, write the equation in y equals mx plus b form, find the slope and the y-intercept, and then write the equation. Okay, and then on the last page, these are all in slope-intercept form, and you're going to graph them using the slope-intercept form like we just talked about until we get to the bottom. The ones on the bottom are standard form. So if we want to graph them, we need to put them in slope-intercept form. So you take the equation and you solve for y. So we want to get y by itself. So I'm going to minus the 1/2 x. And negative y equals negative 1/2 x plus 2. Can't have a negative y. It needs to be positive. So I'm going to divide every term by negative 1. And y is 1/2 x because the negatives cancel. And then minus 2. And now we're in slope-intercept form. We begin at minus 2 again, and we move. So we begin at minus 2, we move up 1 and over 2, and then we can draw that line. So that's what you're going to do on these ones. Solve for y. Once you have it in the solved for y, then you can plot it in slope-intercept form. Make sure you upload all your work to Teams.